welcome everyone to another episode of the Khalis Podcast, a platform to share the work and thoughts of both aspiring and established writers, poets, and artists who are passionate about preserving and furthering Sikh and Panjabi heritage and identity. Today, I'm joined by Divpreet Kaur, author of the brand new children's book that we published, Bibi ne Banaya Saag, which we'll go into in just a moment. But Divpreet Kaur is a mom, a poet, and a lover of all things Punjabi. In an effort to pass that love on to her son, she took inspiration from his Bibi and wrote this rhyme, which makes for a wonderful addition to any little single Kaur's reading time. So, Divpreet Kaur, welcome to the Khalis Podcast. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you.
So, thanks for taking the time out to sit with me. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, but because of the time difference, it hasn't quite worked out. But it's great that we're finally here and we can get on with it.
Finally. I'm excited. Yeah.
Awesome. So I thought I'd just start by asking you a little bit about your background, and then also how you kind of came into this line of writing and why you wrote a children's book.
Background. Okay. I moved to the States when I was 15, and I didn't realize when it was happening, but now as an adult, I realize what an important change that was. I used to be a tomboy growing up. I used to be very energetic, very Punjabi ch kehndे bol padak. Soch ke nahi banda jehda bolda. Just like I was doing my thing. But when I moved here, because of the language barrier, because of just, being in a very different country, very different culture, and not being prepared for it in any way at all, it turned me into an introvert. Complete shift in personality. And I was very reclusive. Main 6 mahine lai kisi nal gall hi nahi kiti. When I was in a public school in Brooklyn, I was just quiet because even though I went to an English medium school in Chandigarh, the accent is there and you don't know when you're in the accent that there's an accent. So when I first spoke on my first day in a big school in Brooklyn, surrounded by people whose faces and language and culture is so different from mine. And I got that little laugh and I was like, oh, I'm not part of this yet. And I didn't know how to become part of it. So I just chup karke main 6 mahine kisi na gall nahi kiti. I would just like put my head down, study, and that's it. And that stuck, kind of that reclusiveness. It became part of me. I'm still an introvert. I still don't just go up to people and start conversations. But that meant that I had to process my teenage emotions somehow. And home life was also, it had its own ups and downs. So poetry became written word, became that that therapeutic processing medium for me. Eventually, I started sharing some of my work on online blogs. Tumblr was a big thing back then. And then once I started going into more Sikh spaces, going to there was a camp here, Sidak in New York, Jakarta. That's where they used to have open mic nights, and that's where I first tried out sharing it, verbally as spoken word or whatever. And that kind of solidified, like, oh, okay, what I'm saying is resonating. It's not just my feelings. And then poetry became something that I could connect through with people. So that poetry became a love almost after that. After seeing that it's not just me being emo in my bedroom, it's a connected medium. And then I got introduced to some fantastic poetry by Professor Singh in Panjabi. And I was like, oh wait, I can do that too. Punjabi is my first language. Why am I writing in English where I don't even have the right words to convey some of my feelings? So I started writing in Punjabi, and that just made so much sense. And of course, my husband is the greatest supporter in pushing me to write more in Punjabi. And so he was like, okay, this is something that not a lot of people are doing in the diaspora, at least, where you can speak on growing up back there and that cultural connection in a language that'll be accessible to both, people here and there. So that stuck with me. And again, a major life change where, I became a mom, and that's when the gear started turning. And as I read the English books that were very lovingly gifted to us by everybody when Anok was born. I'm reading those books with him, and I'm reading some of the Punjabi books that we have, which are a little bit for older kids. And I see him gravitating towards the rhymey, sing-songy stuff. And
Right.
I realized, oh, okay, there's something I can do here. And that kind of created that path forward for me.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So you kind of your journey into writing this particular book was primarily because of the fact that you had a child.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
saw that he gravitated toward a specific kind of book that perhaps wasn't available in Punjabi. It was mainly
Yeah.
just in English.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe I hadn't done enough research. Maybe books like that exist. I know there's children's books, plethora of them in Punjabi out there. In fact, we had some fantastic ones that were helpful in identifying like vegetables, fruits, colors,
right.
and he loves those. But to me, it was just like an opportunity. I didn't even do the research, which is, I got to give my flowers to the existing authors out there. But for me, it was like, oh, wait, this is something I can do too for my kid. It wasn't even a like, okay, if other people get to enjoy it, that's just like a bonus. Um, I was very hyper focused on like, okay, Anok needs to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
able to read this and enjoy it. So it was
Right.
very much that drive. Yeah.
Okay, okay, awesome. And because I'm a parent myself, and I speak to many other parents, and there is a genuine kind of um, not fear, but a concern that, the fact that we do live in the diaspora, most of us, we speak English as we're doing right now, most of the
Yeah.
time during the day, right? So unless we're having
Yeah.
conversations perhaps with parents, grandparents, or the Gurdwara, or obviously within the house as well.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of my friends that there is this kind of concern that they're not speaking and they're not being exposed to Punjabi as much as perhaps they ought to be. So was that a
Yeah.
part of your thinking as well, not just for him to have something that he would like, but actually
Yeah.
a way of
Yeah.
preserving the
Big
language?
time. Big time. Again, in my husband's family, his dad, so my father-in-law, was born in Punjab and up until 10ish, and then they moved to the UK. So
Okay.
most of them grew up like Kare. My husband's dadaji tried to like keep Punjabi first and foremost. My dad does, like my father-in-law does speak Punjabi really well, but ਵੱਡੇ ਹੋਣ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹੋਏ ਹੋ, it's just easier. It's just
Yeah.
easier to slip in English.
Mhm.
Same with my mother-in-law. She got married and came to the UK when she was like 17, 18, I think 18, 19, I should say. And although now she's much more comfortable speaking in English too. And then, my husband and his sister also, like they speak Punjabi conversationally, but nikal the English. So
Yeah.
when I came in, my mother-in-law was kind of like, oh, I can do some of the old school Tate Punjabi stuff with you because you'll get it.
Right, right,
Because the
right, right.
jokes would fly over everyone else's head, and I was like, no,
Okay,
let's
okay.
let's do this. So that kind of breath of fresh air is something I also experience when I go back home because automatically, ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ everyone around you is speaking Punjabi, it just feels just like you're dipping into warm water. It's just home.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that
yeah.
familiarity with Punjabi is something I was very keen on establishing in my kids. So that there's no like confusion between tanka and tata, like these little things
Mhm.
that I see in kids
Mhm.
that grew up in a diaspora. And no shade at all, but when that happens, I can identify it, and like I want my kid to be able to be like, oh no, yeah, tanka, tatta, tatta. Like I know these
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Rara, I can speak easily. I can
Right.
prattle off old Punjabi proverbs with ease. पता नहीं लगना चाहिए कि ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ कि ਉੱਥੇ ਦਾ. Like he's
Mhm. Mhm.
Punjabi, and there's
Mhm.
kids like that here. There's people I've met who are like, yeah, we're born and raised here, but you can't tell. And I was like,
Mhm.
that's my
Mhm.
goal. My kid, if he goes to school here in public school, it's almost difficult for him to pick up English,
Right,
which is
right.
like, I
Okay.
want that much Punjabi in him. It's difficult to do. It's very difficult to do all the, preschool at home, like Miss
Yeah.
Rachel material. It's all English. But then that's why it's much more like the drive you get when the first thing they say is mommy, and you're like, no, I'm mama. Or it's not grandpa or grandma, it's dada, dadi, or baba,
Sure.
biji. So
Sure.
that's why I'm very grateful that it was almost like an automatic decision by everyone. Baba Bibi ji speak in Punjabi with him. We try to like reinforce if he's picked up a new word in English, we're like, okay, a rang lal hai. If he says that's a
Right.
red balloon, we're like, yeah, lal balloon, like it's like that.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
it's difficult to keep doing it and make sure that it's right there along with his English language development. But it's definitely a concern because, like you said, English nikal jandi hai ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ, that's what our roti roji is in. We're
That's
used to
right.
that. We went to school in that, so it's a hard thing, but it's definitely at the forefront of, I'm pretty sure, every parent's mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we find, kind of what we try to make like a concerted effort on doing is like after picking up from school, instead of just saying, oh, how was your day? What did you
Mm.
eat? We'll just ask those basic questions in
Yeah.
Punjabi. So like, "Ki
Yeah.
khada si aaj?" So like Ratan, he's
Yeah.
the youngest, right? And the older two, they understood and grasped Punjabi quicker because we were living with our parents at the time. We
Mm.
moved out and then he was born
Mm.
and he doesn't live within the grandparents. And they can
Okay.
obviously visit and stuff and they come and stay for a while. But that makes a big difference from what I've
Big
seen.
difference.
So
Oh my
for him,
gosh.
he
Yeah.
finds it a bit more kind of more hard work, which is kind of
Mm.
sad as well. But I think the onus is on the parents just to
Mm.
keep drilling it in. So wherever you
Yeah.
get the opportunity,
Yeah.
that you have to kind of
Oh
just put
yeah.
it in, right? Because I think
Yeah.
it will stick. It will become, they'll become used to it,
Yeah.
um, and then it'll become easy with time. I wanted to ask about this specific book. So obviously it's a rhyme. Where did the inspiration from this come from? I know you mentioned that there's other similar books in English,
Yeah.
but like just the story itself between the fact that the grandchild and the grandmother go together.
Yeah.
Where did all that come from?
Absolutely. So I have been obsessed with the idea of creating like a cookbook. I don't cook that well, but I just like the idea of a very illustrated, fun cookbook, almost done in like a Harry Potter-esque way of creating like a witches. So I was collecting recipes from my mom. I had called up my mom. I was like, Mom, Punjabi ਚ detail ਚ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋ ਕਿ ਆ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਣਾਈਦੀਆਂ. And I had a list of things that are very traditional, like panjiri, ਕੇ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੱਖਣ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੱਢੀਦਾ, ਕੇ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਘਰੇ ਬਣਾਈਦਾ, ਸਾਗ, ਕੜੀ, and all that good stuff, right? ਪੜੋਲੀ ਵਾਲੀ ਦਾਲ. Like I had all these things that are remembered from childhood, like making it in a very traditional manner. So I called up my mom and I was like, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਐਨ detail ਚ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਭੇਜ ਦਿਓ. So I had collected these recipes. So the idea had been brewing in my mind, in the back of my mind, to do something with this material. But then again, of course, when Anok was born and he was hanging out with his grandparents, and we're so lucky, like you mentioned, when the grandparents are around, it's just a very different opportunity for the kid to have that connection with their roots and their culture because dada dadi hale bhi wo cheezain carry kar rahe hain, right? So but still, when I saw him interact with my parents, Nana Nani, because they get to visit, whenever they get to visit, oh Punjabi ji bolte hain. My parents purely speak in Punjabi. Like they know English to get by, obviously, but
Right.
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਭਾਸ਼ਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਹੈ. Then it also clicked for me that I want Anok to be able to chat off with his Nana Nani too. ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਘਰੇ ਉਹ English ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ switch ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਦਾਦਾ ਦਾਦੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ. But when he goes to Nanke, I don't want him to be awkward around there. Like I
Yeah,
don't know what
sure.
to say to these people.
Yeah.
Because sadly I've seen that. I've seen that where the conversation ends at kidda bibi thika, and that's
Right.
no shade, but like
Yeah.
it's hurtful. So
Yeah.
that's what pushed me to kind of think of this way where grandparents who only speak Punjabi have a way to connect with their toddler grandkids that is beyond, just hanging out with the kid and maybe like going for walks and stuff, which is that grandparents do everywhere. I don't know what other grandparents are the ones who are there kind of taking care of the kid as the parents go out to work. But creating a sit down activity made a lot more sense because again, Anok, as he was growing up, when he would like pick up his books and go to his dada and say book, that was his thing at like I think 17, 18 months. He would just
Right.
repeat the word asking for it to be
Yeah.
read. I saw that. I was like, okay, this is a connection where a core memory is being formed. And I remember my kids' books that I read, and I still have flashes of those images, that I will never forget them. I don't know how old I was exactly, but I know what planted that seed of loving to read, etc. So I want that associated with grandparents. And I kind of, that's why like it also was a motivation for just making it in English, so that there's almost a kind of a push, maybe some pressure to be like, oh, okay, I want to know primarily what it's saying in Punjabi versus kind of using a crutch of transliteration or translations here. So that was my seeing my mom and dad, my Anok's nana nani kind of like try to speak in English, and I was like, "नहीं, तुसी पंजाबी बोलो.
Right.
ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਿੱਖਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਿੱਖਣੀ." They still try sometimes ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ again English ਨਿਕਲ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, and I'm like, "Nah, ਪੰਜਾਬੀ
Right. Yeah.
ਇਹਨੇ
Yeah.
ਸਿੱਖਣੀ ਹੈ. You're good."
That's
So
it.
that was the motivation for this specific book, having those recipes in my mind, and then seeing my parents interact with him.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think one thing I really liked about this book when we first spoke, when you pitched it to Khalis House, was that it's not just a book that presents a story in Punjabi, but actually the fact that he's making, saag with his Bibi. So the fact that it's a very traditional way of cooking as well. He gathers the raw ingredients, the what he uses, the utensils, all of that. So actually, it's not just about the language, but also you're kind of preserving a culture within that as well, which I thought this is amazing. We've got like a bunch of kids books, and I've not seen that before. I've not seen where you're bringing in both aspects of the culture and the language. So I think that has to be commended. And like I said, we've spoken about it before, but I'm looking forward to the next one in this series, because I'd love to see Bibi Banai Dal or wherever it might be, right? Because I think it is important, because when you were speaking there, you said how your parents are of that generation where they're carrying it forth. And before we know it, that onus will be on us, and we've got to think about how we can carry it forward, right? Especially so living in the diaspora. And I think one way we can do that is through books. I think that's me. It's a very kind of happy medium. It's a very engaging way that you can pass that on to the next generation.
Thank you so much. Using the terminology for the specific tools and the processes was super important, and was one of the things I wanted to focus on, whether it was that initial idea of writing like a witch's grimoire. It was very Harry Potter girly of me. Right. And it was going to be for like my friends who read Harry Potter too. But even in that, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to talk about the Kotane and, the Datti that I haven't seen ever anywhere. And I was like, I just don't want to talk about making saag, because now people mix each other in a book.
Yeah.
So that's not the saag I want to talk about. I want to talk about the saag I saw being made back home, and I know the process is painstaking. It would be an all-day adventure.
Right.
So, and I remember like there's authentic experiences of like having to hold the pressure cooker while my mom did the kotana and learn it, and it was like a big duty. Okay, don't mess it up, Divpreet.
Right.
I remember those things, and I wanted to pass that experience on, because again, it's something that organically maybe the next generation may never get to experience. So books are the way to preserve that. And it's another thing where you were talking about how some things that are grandparents are carrying, or our parents are carrying, that might get lost if we don't take care of them. The simplest or the most frequent reminder is boliyan. ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਸੰਗੀਤ ਤੇ ਜਾਈਦਾ ਹੈ, ਵਿਆਹ ਤੇ ਜਾਈਦਾ, if there's not enough elders present, ਬਾਕੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਦੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਵੱਲ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's having books for that is like a clear indication that we need those things preserved. And whenever someone whips out a book at those gatherings, everyone's relief is like palpable in the room. Like, okay, theek hai, chalo. Phir agge je kisi nu gaana na aanda hove, that's a problem. Like it's one of those things where if you're not naturally talented, unfortunately, nothing can be done there. But still, puraniyan bibiyan kehda naturally talented hundiyan se. It's just like it's you do it. You sure. Your voice breaks, but you hekla ke kar do kaam tusi, so it's that idea of just pushing through to keep it going. And I saw somebody making fun of like these books, boliyan wale kitabaan especially, and I kind of bristled at that. I was like, well, it's not there, then what? ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਿਆਣੇ ਦੇ ਵਿਆਹ ਤੇ ਕਿਹਨੇ ਗਾਣਾ? ਤੁਸੀਂ?
Mhm.
ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ.
It's a question.
But yeah, so books are absolutely important, even if it feels silly for your pursuit, your idea. Like, "Hey, kiine padhni hai?" It's okay. Do it for you. Yeah.
Yeah. But just on this book, then, I was going to ask, how difficult was it to write this style of book because it's aimed at kind of 3+, right?
Mhm.
Or was it actually easier for you because you had that upbringing in Punjab? So you had that natural kind of
Yeah.
understanding of the language and also the culture.
Yeah.
But was it hard to make it kind of easy for a 3-year-old to interact with?
That's a really good question, and I will admit I kind of feel this not imposter syndrome, but whatever the opposite of that is, because I realize that I don't have a grasp on like adult academic Punjabi because I didn't get to study that back home. I was 15 when I came here, so I know Punjabi up to the 10th grade level,
Right.
and
Okay.
academically. And then conversationally, of course, it's my first language. But even that, as the more comfortable I get with English, I realized this yesterday actually, that
Mm.
now in my head I translate from English to Punjabi
Wow.
instead of
Okay.
Punjabi to English. It used to be like that for the longest time, but
Right.
when the comfort is in the other way around. So
Right.
it was, so to answer your question, because I have more of a grasp on colloquial conversational Punjabi, it was easy to make
Right.
it very simple. But still, I had to be conscious of like making it a rhyme, making it having some repetitive words in there. Um, and that was solely from reading the English rhymes that Anok preferred and wanted to read a lot more, and saw that they have a one or two different beats in there, a lot of repetitions, and that works with the little kiddos. And that's what I wanted to focus on. But otherwise, having written poetry before, being comfortable with creating a little punchy, something that is set to a beat, and then again having that familiarity with the language really helped in coming up with this rhyme.
That's great. It's funny you mentioned there about how like thinking in like Punjabi or English, because
Yeah.
that was something that I never was consciously aware of until somebody mentioned it fairly recently. And
Mhm.
because I was delivering the Bhatia Mema course here, and we were speaking about language, and he said that, oh, I actually think in Punjabi because again he's from Punjab, and I was
Okay.
like, it made me kind of like sit back and think, hang on a second, I actually think in English. And then,
Yeah.
so for me, because again, being born here, right, and Punjabi is this kind of additional language, which again is very sad. But that it shows, and if you're saying that you're now kind of acknowledging that perhaps you're making that shift, it's quite scary to think that that it can
Yeah.
happen. But also, it's
Yeah.
quite promising as well because it shows that it can be reversed as well if you
Absolutely. Yeah.
engage yourself and immerse yourself in that environment of Punjabi.
Yeah. How I became conscious of it is so funny. It's when someone asks, do you need something? And in English, the answer is, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
My mother-in-law asked me about it. She was like, "Divpreet cha peeni hai," because that's the one thing I do with my in-laws. We sit down and drink cha together.
Right.
And I was like, "Nahi, main theek hai."
Okay.
That's
Okay.
not an answer in Punjabi. That's
Right.
a very
Right.
literal translation of "Nah, I'm good."
Right.
So
Right.
I was like, "Oh, we're not
Right.
doing that
Right.
again."
So
So
the
that
grammar
made
is
it
also
very
being,
clear.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy. So with this book, then, what are your hopes with this book?
On a very like hopeful and uh, the high dreams level, I would love it if it's received and loved, by anyone with toddlers, Punjabi, and who want to preserve Punjabi in their home, in their families, that they find this book and pick it up, and it becomes a love collection in their kids' story time. Um, but even on a simpler, like smaller level, it exists. It's out there, and every time my kid picks it up and brings it to me to read it to him by saying "Bibi sag," like those are the two words he's
Oh,
picked
okay.
up.
Right.
It's worth it. I'll do it 100 times over again, even if I sell one copy, because it's
Yeah.
That I'm gonna cry, sorry.
It's okay.
But the hope is, yeah, that, people experience that love, they connect with it. And if someone like me who hasn't been home in so long, or they were born and raised there, lived there for a little while, but then have been here for so long, it's like a nostalgia connection for them to be like, oh yeah, maybe someone might be inspired to make a chula in their backyard. Like, who knows?
Sure,
It's
sure.
just
Yeah.
I want it to trigger something in people where that connection strengthens for them in whichever way that they want it to strengthen. That's the
Mhm.
hope for it.
Yeah. The other kind of big thing at the moment is this idea of representation. And obviously
Mm,
this book does that because the characters are, they're Sikh, they're visibly
yeah.
Punjabi. And
Mm.
how important do you think it is for a child to see that representation in books?
It's very important because you know how ਕਿਤੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾਈਦਾ ਬਾਹਰ, if we see a Singh or a Punjabi person, ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਕੜਾ ਪਾਇਆ ਦਿਖਦਾ ਹੈ, there's a sense of elation, like that's somebody I know. Even if we have never met them before, there's that familiarity. Apne, the word comes up, right? Apna banda hai.
Yeah.
And in Punjabi community especially, that holds a lot of weight. When you meet
Mm.
somebody apna, uh, there's a sense of respect even. And there, my husband, whenever he's out, uh, I lived in New York before we got married, and so whenever he would come up to meet me, take a cab or something, and if it's a Punjabi driver, even if they were Punjab from West Punjab, they'd be like, "Oh, Sardarji, no, fare for you, free."
Okay, right.
If he stopped at a gas station randomly and it was owned by a Punjabi person, no, you're not paying here. It
Mm.
holds a meaning to see that aparat. So for a kid growing up, it's seeing
Mm.
that like, oh, I am not alone
Mm.
in whatever medium I choose to express myself in. But having said that, I'm also of the belief that it it doesn't define or
Mm.
it shouldn't drive your kind of spirit. That ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਹੋ ਕਿਤੇ ਤੇ ਇਹਦਾ at least as a Sikh, right? ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ, because we were meant to be ik in a crowd.
Mhm.
So it is equally important to instill a sense of anak and understanding of what the legacy and the lineage is that brings us here. Yes, it's super cool and fun and inspiring to see Apne out there,
Mm.
and a sense of creating a sense of community even. But it also shouldn't create then if there's a lack of that, it shouldn't create a sadness,
Right,
is what
right.
I'm trying to say. That it
Yeah.
shouldn't be. There's no victimhood that
So,
that should be propagated out of that. That if you don't see it, then either go be it, or just be comfortable and proud and connected in yourself enough to, even if you're alone in the room with your jura and your do gutta lambiyan, that's fine. That's something that I also want to instill in my kid, because we are in a predominantly white county. He'll go to public school where he might be the only one with a jura for a while, and the books they're going to read are American public school system is,
mhm.
it is what it is. So we hope that if someone asks, why do you have that on your head? He can answer the question and be unfazed, instead of being like, why are there no books with sick kids in it? Valid
Right. Yeah.
question, but until that happens, how are you going to handle it? So balance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that I quite like that position because it kind of acknowledges that it's a fine line. Because yeah, even like as adults, when we see someone who is a Punjabi, like just today actually, because I was at the
Mhm.
gym and we live in a predominantly white area in Scotland, and there's
Mhm.
probably on our road they're all white people, and the kids' school all white, right? They're the only Punjabi, the only brown kids. Actually, there's one of the
Oh,
brown
wow.
kids. So at
Okay.
the gym today, for the very first time, I saw like this Punjabi guy was there. I only recognized the fact that he's Punjabi because he had a khanda tattoo on his arm. And instantly, the dil khush ho jata because you like you said, there's that connection there, right? I don't know the guy,
Yeah.
I've seen him before,
Yeah.
right? But there is that sense of like I know who he is kind of thing because he is
Mhm.
Punjabi and clearly Sikh.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine how that for a child how much kind of sense of safety that would give them as well. But I also like how you've said that it shouldn't be something they're relying on, because they have to be in a position themselves to be sure of who they are. And again, that grounding comes from knowing you at the heart, reading and being close to Sikhi and our heritage and our culture. So I like that perspective. I think it's a good one to have. I wanted to just quickly go back to the medium of storytelling through books. And I've asked this question to kind of previous authors that published through Khalis House. Because obviously we live in a day and age of animation and CGI, and there's so many AI, there's so many crazy things you can do.
Yeah.
But for you as a poet, as an author, as somebody who's now published a children's book, how important is the written word in this age of CGI and YouTube? My kids will instantly go towards a YouTube animation than pick up a book, right? I have to literally switch it off and then give them a book. So, but how important is it for you? And is it more important, or is it just another medium that perhaps they ought to be having in balance with other things?
I'll answer the first part first. Okay. When I think about that, everyone's kind of panic and kind of holding on to the written word, that it's disappearing. It's not, because even if we take the example of CGI, a movie being made, a video game being made, right? That art in itself is fantastic. Like people who work on it, animators, I wouldn't dream of being that talented. But ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ script ਪੜਾਈ ਹੋਣੀ.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. Somebody wrote down what the storyline is. Somebody wrote a proposal for even developing something. The written word was part of the process. It's never going away. And even if someone throws out a wild scenario, like what if it's just a Zoom meeting that people are having and they're, pointing down, somebody's taking notes somewhere. People are going to write down. There's still people like me who have to make a note, like written task list to get the satisfaction of crossing things off. We'll exist. No matter where the world goes, we will still have our little notepad and pencil to do things with. So in any form, whether creative or everyday life, written word doesn't really go away. It may change mediums. There'll be emails, there will be memos that go out, whatever. If a book is being written, the first draft will be a napkin that person wrote down on when they woke up and they got the idea. It won't go away. That's my, maybe someone will call me naive listening to this and they're like, AI will take over the world. Okay, great. But I'll be in my corner writing things down. It won't be eliminated. But it can also be then not negated that things are changing. As you mentioned, next generation is preferring to watch somebody tell them, almost spoon feed them information, but that's where, that's a whole different conversation. We don't need to go into, but even then, even their favorite YouTube person, unless they're doing Let's Plays or something else, they're writing down a script.
Yeah.
Podcasters might be riffing off, but again, there's something written involved. Nothing is happening if they're looking at something informed and they want to learn from it, there's written word involved. Somebody did some research. There's a paper being referred to, an article being referred to. Written word is involved. So it's again if it's the next generation we're worried about, it's kind of on us. If the kid kind of staying in with their interests, if the kid says, oh, I learned something about this new makeup. I'm going to talk about makeup because that's what I know. I learned something new about this company that's coming out with vegan makeup and they don't use XYZ. And you're like, oh, cool. I learned about, this plant that you can extract pigment out of. Read about it. Let's go find it out. Where does it grow? Let's go look it up. So it's on parents to, again, turn them around and kind of make their focus and have them make their interests so rich that they do gravitate towards the written word to enhance their interest even. क्योंकि ठीक है, attention span ਤਾਂ ਅੱਜਕੱਲ ਬਣਾਈ ਏਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਜੀ ਤੋਂ ਤੀਜੀ ਤੇ and then you're down the spiral. But if you're engaging your kids and you're kind of trying that than it is like, okay, what video did you watch? What was the topic about it? And then that can be steered into a more into a medium that we are comfortable with and we think is super important. It is important even now. Like I filled out the questionnaire for my kids like 2 years exam, and they're like, how often do you read to the kid and what's the screen
Yeah.
time? And it felt really cool to be like 7 days a week I read to him. But
Yeah.
that to keep that consistent,
Right.
we
That's the
have to
thing.
be engaged. Right now, we know what our kid eats, when he poops, when he like everything. But as they grow up, we kind of let go of that control or
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that, oh, we कर नहीं सकते, right? But we कर
Mhm.
सकते हैं ਅਸੀਂ बट
Mhm.
जो
Mhm.
extra effort ਹੁੰਦਾ। बाकी
Sure.
ये भी
Sure.
है कि मैं बोल रही हूँ जब मेरा न्याणा 10-11 साल का होगा पता नहीं मेरे तो होगा कि नहीं।
Yeah, of course there is that. I think that's a great answer because it almost comes back to the balance as well. Like, it's inevitable, right? They're going to be
Yeah,
exposed to YouTube and animation and CGI. But for me, like the art of storytelling, one thing I think that CGI and all this other stuff will never capture is that moment where you're reading a novel or reading a book and you imagine that scene, like because that's your interpretation, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
whereas when you're watching something, that's somebody else's imagination.
yeah,
And I think that's where like it's quite sad where like if a child doesn't read or if a parent doesn't push the child to read because of the fact that we live in a modern age now, things are changing. Yeah, there's
yeah.
different ways of learning and educational resources, and we should definitely be
Mhm,
tapping into those.
mhm,
But I think there's just something quite I don't know if it's like the word is no, it's not nostalgic, but something quite pure about reading a
mm.
book
Yeah,
where you're kind of, you're painting out the scene in your mind as you're reading it.
yeah,
And I often find when I read a book, and if there's a film based on it, I always find the film is never quite enough. Like, that sense. So because you've already visualized like what the person looks
yeah,
like, the scene they're
yeah.
in. So for me, from that perspective, I think it's hugely important that actually books continue. And I'm not going to stop being published, but I just think that I'm a bit of a
Yeah.
traditionalist in that sense that they certainly still have a place, even in the world of CGI and
Yeah,
AI and all this
yeah,
stuff that's come out.
absolutely. And yeah, I kind of went another way. You were asking about storytelling specifically.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's that magic of exactly what you said. It's instilling yourself in the story itself, doing that self-insert that like you're walking along with the characters. That can't happen if somebody else is telling you the
right,
story
right.
through their distillation of their experiences.
Mhm, mhm.
So having that going to the source will never be beat. But again, my opinion is biased because I'm a book lover talking to a book lover, so we understand what we're saying. But
Yeah,
to create that love, yeah, it's on us to then pass it on to the kids.
yeah,
Um, but I don't know if you've been kind of tapping into the all the new things people are trying with AI, right? Like different art, AI music, even a novel that's completely written by AI. And the majority of like the public opinion is always this looks that there is something missing in those things. Everyone can identify that it
yeah,
doesn't look human or it doesn't
yeah,
feel right. It's that missing of the soul and the spirit
yeah,
is like
yeah,
the human
absolutely.
experience that just cannot be
Yeah,
duplicated so far. Baki pata nahi.
yeah. And the other thing is obviously with AI, somebody has programmed the computer, right?
Yeah,
So you have to think
yeah,
about, you know, just bandina, like whoever done that, they have a specific worldview, right? And that their own bias has gone into the scripting of that
yeah,
and the writing of the program. So there is that as well. But you're right,
yeah.
totally right. The human element is definitely missing. So yeah, I think we're okay for now. Certainly our
I think we're okay for
generation.
now. Yeah.
I think we're good. I think we're good. Benji, I was going to also ask about your kind of other work. Like I know obviously this is a children's book, but is there something in the pipeline, something you're working on? Is there any kind of ambitions you have on writing maybe a novel in Punjabi or even in English? Is there anything you're kind of working on or have your eyes set on?
Oh my goodness. What don't I have my eyes on? um, like I mentioned earlier, I had that that recipe book idea, which I may not like. I haven't scrapped, even though I will create these books about with the
Yeah,
uh, children's book series. I still have kind of my eyes set on that because it's such a fun little idea. Again, it's not. I'm not thinking about whether it'll be a success or not. It's just it'll be cool to have a witch's grimoire in Punjabi and
right.
you're writing about the magical properties of ginger and lychee. Like I'm super obsessed with this
Well, you know
idea.
what, especially now, because there is like this growing trend towards, like, when you go to Starbucks or these places, they have now, like, other like
The chai,
haldi chai
haldi.
and
Oh
all
yeah,
that,
turmeric milk is coming. Yeah,
turmeric milk and all that. So
yeah,
you never know, there might be something
yeah.
in
The
there.
Gore are catching on. They're
Yeah,
getting ghee from Trader Joe's. Like
that's right. Yeah.
it's not a fully scrapped idea, but that's one that's
Mm.
been just revolving around in my head. And
Okay.
then, of course, I want to publish poetry. But that one is so daunting in itself because you always have that doubt, right? I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't get it enough Instagram likes, so who's gonna read it and buy and read it?
Mm,
So th- that's there. And
yeah.
of course, I need to work on it too. Like I mentioned, I'm very reactive in my writing. I don't practice it enough, which I fully admit that, if I got to get better at something, I got to practice the craft.
Sure.
But
Sure.
so at this point, at least, if I push to write, it doesn't feel
Mm.
authentic or good enough.
Right.
So, but whenever I've written as a reaction, as to process either like a personal trauma, something happened, or a global trauma, even,
Right.
that feels more like it's me on
Hmm. Hmm.
paper. So until I get comfortable in flowing on paper on demand, I don't think I'm ready to publish my poetry, but that is definitely an aspiration. I don't think that'll ever go away no matter what I do. But
Okay.
writing long form as a novel, yeah, that's something I'll leave to people who can do that much better than I
Yeah.
can ever even try. But poetry it'll always stay, and maybe even art someday.
Right. Okay.
I'm a
Okay.
I have artistic aspirations too. I've done murals
Awesome.
in my own home. Little gifts of hukamnama paintings to my one of my friends that got married. But that's
Awesome.
more of it's a gift hobby. It's something I don't see scaling up or anywhere. My husband will push me for everything.
Right.
Anything I knew, into something new I do, who's like, you can do it a
Yeah.
lot more. And I'm
That's
like,
amazing.
all right, cardio. ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸਾਹ ਲੈ ਲੈਣ ਦਿਓ. But he's
Yeah.
definitely a driving force in pushing me to, um, expand my talents and put
Yeah.
what I can do out there. Because and you need that cheerleader to kind of
Hmm.
tell your self
Hmm.
doubts to quiet down.
Yeah.
And he's been that person, so it's very cool. And my mother-in-law too. I dedicated the book to her because she's raising an Oaksing, basically, like where we
Right.
all go off to work. So
Yeah. Yeah.
she's the superwoman in the house. So she's very supportive too, and so I have those cheerleaders in my field. So eventually, when I do get the courage myself, those two things are the main kind of on my horizon: a poetry book and a cookbook.
Awesome. I look forward to it. I wanted to end the podcast episode by asking you kind of any advice that you have for other aspiring authors, any lessons learned along the way. I know you've mentioned there kind of that imposter syndrome, which we all have. I think every writer has that. So
Yeah,
I think that's a normal part of, especially
yeah.
as someone who's publishing a piece of work for the very first time.
Mhm.
Um, so, but yeah, any other kind of bits of advice for aspiring authors? Anything you've learned along the way?
Absolutely. I will say that with the little experience that I have in this, it's definitely, like I mentioned, find the people that will tell your self doubts to quiet down and, be your cheerleaders. And it can be your family, friends, a coworker, because I've definitely had some good people at work even be so excited for me whenever I mention that, oh, I'm going to an open mic night to share a new poem. Um, and it's whatever your village is, whoever your cheerleaders are, find those and keep them close so that whenever you are feeling self-doubt about taking a big step, they can tell you and push you and be there to hold your hand even. So that's one. And the second one is something that I naturally got to do because I was reading children's books with my kid. But whatever your scope is, whatever that person wants to go into, read what exists, like do your research. What is already out there? What are people doing? And then eventually you'll find a space that is kind of empty in that world. And when you find that space and you think you can fill it up by presenting whatever you can uniquely present to that space, go at it.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't done. There was no recipe book where a kid was interacting with their grandma, and it was very much Punjabi oriented. As far as like I did my research, this didn't exist, and even if it did exist, it didn't have my voice in it. So whatever is uniquely you, whatever you think you can contribute to that empty space in that creative world, go for it, because trust me, it's needed. You are needed. Your voice is needed. But self-doubt will always be there. So find those cheerleaders to push yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I would echo that. And I think also a big part of it is, like, you mentioned about how you can almost find your niche within that area, right? Or you find a gap in the market, whatever the might be. Within that, you'll have a passion to bring a specific piece of work out, and that passion will then drive that kind of creative, that whole process forward.
Yeah.
So I think a part of it has to be, it's something you definitely feel the need to do, something you feel passionate about. And I think that will then that will then, on the days you have the self-doubt, that will, overtake that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, that's awesome.
Plus, if you're a Sikh or Punjabi artist and author, Khalis House has been a breeze to work with. So thank you so much to you, Baji, because again, my husband, he recommended it because EP10, Inni Kaur has published through you guys. And he was like, yeah, they were fantastic for her. So go to them. So, and then after that, I'm going to be on my soapbox here for a little bit. Baji was fantastic. The whole experience was fantastic. I had no idea what I was doing. I just had a poem and I was like, I want it published. Here, go do something with it. And that's what you did. You were like, yeah, I got it. And then there was, and even then, even if I handed it to you because I had no experience, I still had the safety of knowing that whenever creative decisions were being made, you were respecting my input. And that's such a huge thing to an artist, even if they're brand new in a space. When that respect is given to them, it kind of sets a standard for their future. Like, oh, okay, this is what I'm looking for the next time I'm, working with anyone else, or even again with the same people, or doing something else in my domain. So it was very fortunate of me to have found Khalis House to work with, and then it kind of gave me the confidence, because the first question was also like, are you going to do something more with this idea, which is so encouraging to hear. Even if I didn't want to at that point, just hearing that question was like, oh, okay, I will. Now I will. So it was great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've been great to work with as well. So yeah, I think the feeling is definitely mutual. Okay, Benji. So I think maybe we'll wrap it up there for this podcast. Obviously, we'll stay in touch, but all the best with your creative endeavors. For those of you who are watching and listening, the book is available to order from khalishouse.com. For folk in the US, you can also head over to lawguard.net. We'll put it in the details. You can order it to save yourself on the shipping costs, because I know they are quite extortionate at times. So, yes, it's an amazing book, and I'm not just saying it because we published it. Genuinely, when you sent it across to us, I read the pitch and I was like, this is definitely something we have to publish, because one, it doesn't exist, but just the idea behind merging both the language and the cultural aspect together, to create such a unique and beautiful book. Actually, even with the illustrations, they complement it so well. So I can't praise it highly enough. So yeah, you can check it out. So thank you once again, Benji, for creating this.
Thank you so much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.